Jonathan wasn't nervous. He'd done interviews before, dozens. But something about this one, the silence before the cameras rolled, it felt rehearsed. And not by him. He noticed the way the young journalist adjusted his cuffs twice. Like someone preparing for a performance, not a conversation. The studio was unusually quiet, even for soundproof walls. There was no laughter, no warmth. Only eyes watching behind the glass. Jonathan sat still, sensing something beneath. The surface. This wasn't going to be about his career or his craft. It would be something else entirely. The journalist leaned in just a little too close, his smile practiced, his questions still hidden behind polite banter. "Before we begin," the journalist said, "off the record, how do you really see yourself? I mean, without the costume." The tone was casual, the intent wasn't. Jonathan smiled. Not politely, not mockingly, but knowingly. He'd been around long enough to recognize the difference between curiosity and calculation. As the red recording light blinked on, Jonathan quietly took a breath. He knew people like this. Clever with words, desperate for a moment. The first question was simple. Too simple. A trap dressed as small talk. Jonathan didn't answer right away, and that silence said everything. "We'll edit that out," the journalist chuckled. But Jonathan noticed how tightly he gripped the mic. He was expecting resistance, not stillness. And in that moment, Jonathan decided he wouldn't defend. He would let the interview play out, naturally. People reveal themselves when you let them talk long enough. "Before we continue, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories." The first few questions danced around personal topics, fame, social media, image. Nothing new. But Jonathan could feel the journalist getting restless for more. "You know," Elliot began, his voice honeyed. "A lot of people say you're just playing a version of yourself. What do you think about that?" Jonathan smiled slightly. "That depends. Most people are playing a version of themselves too, especially with microphones in front of them." A beat of silence followed. The crew behind the glass looked at each other. That wasn't the soundbite Elliot was hoping for. The journalist leaned back, but not to relax. He was recalculating, trying to find the right angle, something to stir the pot. "So, were you always this perfect? Or did you just learn to say the right things?" he asked, light laugh covering a jab. Jonathan didn't blink. "I don't think I've said the right thing once today," he replied. "But maybe that's the point." Elliot's smile froze for a second. He wasn't used to responses like this, gentle, but impossible to push over. There was no defensiveness, no ego, just calm awareness. And that was more disarming than any argument. For the first time in the interview, Elliot Carr, the journalist, felt like the one under a microscope. "Tell me something not in your press kit," Elliot challenged, suddenly switching tones. "Tell me something real. Something people don't know." Jonathan paused, then looked toward the ceiling, like reaching back into something untouched. "All right," he said softly. "There's a memory I haven't shared in years. When I was 9, I drew a picture of a man on a bench. My teacher looked at it, smiled, and said, 'That's you.' I told her, 'No, it's just a man waiting for a bus.' She said, 'I think you're the kind of person who waits with others.'" Elliot tilted his head slightly, confused. "And what did that mean to you?" "Back then, nothing. But later, everything," Jonathan said, his voice like calm water. "Most people run ahead. Few wait beside someone who's tired." That quiet story landed heavier than anything rehearsed. And it wasn't dramatic. It was just human. Elliot didn't follow up. Not right away. He was watching Jonathan now, differently. The walls of irony and ambition didn't work here. This wasn't a game Jonathan played. And somewhere in that moment, the interview began to change. Not in tone, but in truth. Elliot tried to return to his notes, but something about the pace of the conversation was off, and he couldn't get it back. "You ever feel like you're pretending?" he asked, but this time the question sounded more like a whisper than a dig. Jonathan gave him a long look. You mean me, or you? The journalist exhaled through a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He closed his notebook. You're not who I expected, he admitted, almost reluctantly. You're not defensive. You're not rehearsed. It's unsettling. Maybe, Jonathan said gently, it's not that I'm different. Maybe it's just that you expected a version of me that isn't real. Behind the glass, a producer leaned forward. This wasn't the kind of episode they were used to, but it was better. Elliot suddenly admitted, I came here today thinking I'd expose you somehow. I thought there was something fake about your image. And now, Jonathan asked, not as a challenge, but with real interest. Now I just feel like I'm the one being interviewed, Elliot said, eyes lowering. And for the first time, he meant it. The interview wrapped quietly. No dramatic moment, no loud headline, just a gentle fade from the tension that had started it all. Elliot stood up, slower than before. He looked at Jonathan, no longer like a subject, but like a person he'd actually met. I learned more in the last hour than in any media course I've taken, he said honestly. Jonathan nodded once. You weren't here to ask questions. You were here to learn. And I think you did. Outside, the city buzzed on. But inside the studio, something still hung in the air, the rare quiet of a real exchange. The cameras turned off. But the memory of the conversation would stay, not because it was controversial, but because it was human. Jonathan picked up his coat, gave a soft nod to the crew, and left without fanfare, as if he hadn't just changed something. Elliot sat alone for a few minutes, not to review notes, but to reflect. The man he tried to deconstruct had just taught him something. Later, when the episode went live, comments poured in. Not about drama, but about grace, about poise, about the strange power of listening. And Elliot? He never asked questions the same way again. The hallway outside the studio was quiet, nearly empty. Jonathan didn't rush. He moved like someone who had left nothing unsaid. A member of the crew stepped out after him, pretending to check his phone, but really just wanting to say something. He didn't. There's a particular silence after genuine conversations, a stillness that follows. Honesty, like the air catching its breath. Jonathan passed the elevator, but paused when he saw the janitor. They exchanged a nod. Two people who didn't need words to understand each other. In that simple moment, the interview felt smaller. The world was still turning, and Jonathan was still just Jonathan. He waited for the elevator doors to close before adjusting his coat. Not for vanity, but for comfort. It had been a long hour. Meanwhile, upstairs, Elliot was still in the studio, unmoving. He stared at his notes like they were someone else's handwriting. His producer walked in slowly, unsure of what to say. That was something, he mumbled. Elliot nodded. He didn't need feedback. He just needed time. He had come to extract, but ended up reflecting. For the first time in his short career, Elliot wasn't proud of the gotcha questions. He was curious about something deeper. In the editing bay, the episode was already being reviewed. The crew had expected clean sound. They didn't expect replay-worthy silence. The audio tech turned the volume up during a moment when Jonathan had said nothing at all, just breathed. Even that felt intentional. We've had celebrities in here, someone whispered. But that was something different. Everyone nodded, without knowing exactly what they meant. The youngest assistant played the episode twice. She texted her brother, "You gotta hear this guy." Not what I thought. Behind the scenes, the ripple effect began quietly. Not viral, not yet. Just remembered. Back in his office, Elliot stared at the rough cut on his screen. He scrubbed through, pausing on his own face, smirking, regretting. Jonathan hadn't embarrassed him. He hadn't retaliated. And somehow, that made the lesson sharper. Elliot thought of his journalism professor, who once said, "Sometimes the best story is the one you fail to write." He made a note in the episode description. This one changed me. And as the upload bar ticked forward, he realized it wasn't about Jonathan anymore. It was about how he listened. The episode dropped quietly. No trailer, no teaser. But within minutes, The comment section started breathing. A mother of two wrote, "I was folding laundry. I stopped, then cried. I don't know why, just thank you." Another user said, "I came here to roll my eyes at another celeb. Now I'm sitting here thinking about my childhood teacher." The video didn't trend, it grew. Like a conversation people didn't know they needed until they heard it. A man recovering in hospice sent the link to his sister, writing, "This made me feel like I existed again." There were no dramatic twists, no exposed secrets, just stillness, vulnerability, and something uncomfortably rare in digital spaces: sincerity. He didn't fight back, one comment read. He just let the guy talk. And somehow, it flipped everything. Jonathan never shared the video himself. He didn't need to. The people who needed it found it. By midnight, the crew's inbox was full, not with interview requests, but gratitude. Sometimes, the loudest echoes come from the softest voices. Elliot didn't sleep that night. Not because he was anxious, but because he was listening again. He played the interview back 3 times. Not for editing, but for learning. He studied his own pauses like they were a language. "I came in to control," he whispered to himself. "And he came in to connect." That difference lingered. The next morning, he scrapped his next 3 show outlines. They didn't feel right anymore. He opened a new document titled, "Real Questions." Beneath it, he typed one sentence. "What if I actually wanted to understand people?" That interview hadn't gone viral in numbers, but it had gone viral in him. For the first time, he felt like a real journalist. Not because he exposed someone, but because he was changed. His producer noticed the shift too. "You all right?" he asked. "Better than before," Elliot replied. That 1 hour with Jonathan, that lesson in gentleness, it would shape every mic Elliot touched from that day on. And the irony? He thought he was creating a story, but instead, he had entered one. Jonathan didn't think about the interview much afterward. He had other things to tend to: scripts, letters, people waiting on him. But as he sat by the airplane window the next morning, something inside him settled. He'd said little, offered no quotes for headlines. But sometimes, the quietest moments leave the clearest echoes. A flight attendant paused as she passed him. "You were on that show, right? I saw the interview last night." "Thank you." Jonathan smiled, not because of the recognition, but because of the recognition of truth. He didn't speak about it. He just returned to his book, a small one he carried everywhere, stories of ordinary people who lived well. The clouds outside drifted slowly, just like his thoughts. He wondered if the journalist had slept well, if he felt lighter. In a world addicted to speed and noise, this moment reminded him that stillness was still contagious. When the plane landed, Jonathan gathered his bag and stepped out, as he always did, unnoticed, unbothered, and unchanged in the ways that mattered. But somewhere across the city, a young man with a microphone had changed, quietly, permanently, because someone chose not to win, but to listen. To a 90-second clip of Jonathan's childhood story was posted by a fan. It had no hashtags, no music, just a title: "You need to hear this." In a sea of shouting content, it whispered. People scrolled past, then came back. Something in that thumbnail pulled them gently. The clip traveled through group chats, inboxes, and comments. Not, "You won't believe this," but "This reminded me of you." A high school teacher played it for her students. One wrote, "I've never seen a grown man speak like that before. I didn't know you could." A retired nurse in Chicago watched it alone with tea. She sent it to her grandson and added, "This made me think of your father." There was no trend. There was only tenderness. And in a world trained to scroll quickly, people paused. Some viewers cried, not because the clip was sad, but because it was still. That short clip became a small lighthouse for people tired of arguing and pretending. It didn't make headlines, but it made people feel seen. And in 90 seconds, a ripple started moving across quiet corners of the internet. Elliot opened his email on a Tuesday morning, expecting junk and deadlines. But what he saw made him sit straighter. Dozens of subject lines read the same thing. That Jonathan interview. I needed that. Thank you. Changed me. One was from a nurse in Vermont. She had listened to the episode on her night shift and wrote, "It helped me stay human during the chaos." A young podcast host in the Philippines asked to speak with Elliot, not about guests, about how you handle being wrong. An elderly man shared a memory of his father who once sat quietly like Jonathan and said, "Maybe we need more men like that." Elliot hadn't expected a fan base. He'd expected backlash. Instead, he got reflection. The messages weren't dramatic. They were personal, honest, and they weren't about Jonathan. They were about how people felt. After hearing him, one email simply said, "He made me want to be kind again." Elliot realized something in that moment. Vulnerability creates echo chambers too, but the good kind. He printed one message and taped it to his desk. It read, "Thank you for listening to someone who listens." Elliot began writing again. Not scripts, not questions, just reflections. Something about that interview awakened a part of him that had been asleep. "Who am I when the cameras stop?" he scribbled one night. A question Jonathan had never asked, but somehow planted in him. He wrote about the silence between their answers. The moment Jonathan asked him, "You mean me or you?" That moment echoed like a bell in Elliot's head. Not judgmental, not harsh, just unignorable. The journal became a companion. He wrote about his childhood, his relationship with his father, even his first lie in journalism school. The pen moved differently now, not to impress, but to uncover. He reread the journal one morning and noticed something strange. He barely mentioned Jonathan's fame, only his presence. That's what stayed with him, the kind of presence that made people soften or reconsider. Elliot never considered himself a soft man, but something inside him was learning how. And every time he wrote, he felt a little less performative and a little more human. Jonathan didn't chase the video's impact. He didn't even follow the views. His life returned to its rhythm: slow mornings, long walks, handwritten letters. A friend mentioned the clip going around. Jonathan smiled. "That's nice." Then went back to sketching the woman sweeping outside. He had learned not to grip attention too tightly. It was a guest, not a goal. His morning coffee shop remained unchanged. People glanced, but rarely interrupted. They could sense the stillness around him. A teenager approached shyly. "I liked your story," he said. Jonathan smiled and replied, "Tell me one of yours sometime." He didn't wear success. He carried sincerity, and that made people trust him instantly. He walked home that day past a street musician playing softly. He dropped $1, nodded once, and kept walking. He lived like his interview, curious, honest, and slow. There were no security details or staged appearances. Just Jonathan and the life he never stopped being present in. And while algorithms soared and fell, he remained anchored to the quiet corners that still matter. Weeks later, Elliot returned to the same seat. A new guest, a different show, but something inside him had changed. He no longer sought the gotcha moment. He sought the moment of truth. "I used to think vulnerability was weakness," he told the new guest. "But now, I think it's the doorway to everything real." The episode ended softly. No viral quote. Just real stories, like Jonathan's. After the show, Elliot stared at the empty seat across from him and whispered, "Thank you." The framed picture behind him wasn't for show. It was for him, a reminder of the day a quiet man helped him find his voice. Listeners noticed the difference. Not louder, just deeper, more present. "You're not trying to prove anything anymore," a fan commented. "You're actually listening." Elliot smiled reading that, because that's what it had all been about. The story didn't end with the episode. It continued, quietly, in every person who heard and chose to live a little softer. One letter came in the mail, handwritten, yellowed envelope. Elliot opened it slowly, expecting another show pitch. But it wasn't. It was from Jonathan's father. Short, humble, and filled with grace. "I watched the interview. You reminded Me of someone I used to be. Elliot reread it 3 times. Each word landed gently. It wasn't praise, it was permission. Permission to keep growing. Permission to fail with dignity. Permission to speak without shouting. He stared at the signature. It was shaky, aged. A reminder that even quiet wisdom comes from long roads. The letter wasn't framed or posted online. It was tucked into the first page of his journal. Some things are meant to be held, not displayed. Like respect, like healing. That one page from an old man taught him more than any podcast course ever could. He wrote back, "Thank you for seeing me. I'm learning to see others too." And 4. The first time, Elliot felt like someone his younger self would be proud of. Jonathan waited near gate 14A. Flight delayed, soft chatter all around. He didn't mind. Airports had always fascinated him, lives intersecting briefly. A woman sat across from him, struggling with her bags and toddler. Jonathan quietly offered to hold her coffee. She paused, then said, "You're that guy, right? From the interview?" He smiled. "I'm just a guy holding your coffee." She laughed. Her son spilled crackers. Jonathan helped pick them up without hesitation. That 15-minute interaction would become her favorite story to tell her. Family. Not because he was famous, because he was kind. Behind them, a teenager nervously typed something into notes, then walked up. "Sir, your interview, it made me talk to my dad again." Jonathan didn't reply with advice. Just a hand on the boy's shoulder and a soft, "That's good." In those airport chairs, no camera rolled, no script prepared, but change still happened. A security officer nodded at Jonathan as he walked past. Not because of recognition, but respect. You don't need a stage to influence people. Sometimes, a gate delay is enough. Elliot received an invitation to speak at a local high school. He almost declined, then remembered what changed him. He didn't prepare a flashy presentation, just wrote 3 words on a card. Listen, pause, respond. The kids expected jokes and clout. They got stories. Not glamorous, but honest. He shared the Jonathan interview, how it unfolded, what he learned, how wrong he was. A 16-year-old girl raised her hand. "So, it's okay to be wrong if we grow?" Elliot nodded. "It's the only way we do." Another asked, "Were you embarrassed?" Elliot smiled. "I was." Then I realized growth always feels a little like shame at first. They clapped when it ended, not wildly, but warmly. The kind of applause that says, "We heard you." A teacher later said, "That was the first time I've seen them actually care." Elliot walked out of the school lighter. Maybe the next generation wouldn't have to unlearn what he had. Maybe Jonathan's impact had planted roots in places he'd never even seen that a year had passed. Elliot sat across from someone familiar. Jonathan. No cameras. Just coffee. 2 changed men, 1 quiet table. "I never asked," Elliot said. "Did you expect that interview to unfold like that?" Jonathan chuckled. "I never expect. I just show up." They talked about books, cities, regrets. Not as journalist and guest, just humans. Elliot said, "You made me look bad that day." Jonathan smiled. "I didn't do anything. You saw yourself. That's the hardest kind of mirror." They laughed. Not at each other, but with relief. The kind that comes after forgiveness, even when it's unspoken. Elliot mentioned the school talk. Jonathan nodded slowly. "Sounds like you passed the torch." 2 coffees became 3. The sun shifted. People came and went. But that table remained unchanged. "You should interview again," Jonathan said. This time, no script. Elliot replied, "Maybe. I already am, just in life." That afternoon didn't go viral. But it was the most important episode Elliot never recorded. Some stories are too sacred for the internet. The story didn't end with an explosion. It ended as all great stories do, with soft closure and open doors. Elliot still hosts his show, but it's different now. Fewer tricks, more truth. The audience is smaller, but it listens deeper. Jonathan keeps walking unnoticed through the world, collecting small moments and turning them into peace. That one interview lives online, modest in views, monumental in meaning. People still find it unexpectedly. Late nights, hard days, new beginnings. And it speaks softly. You help me see again, one woman commented recently. Not with my eyes, with my empathy. Elliot read that comment aloud during a team meeting, then simply said, let's do more of that. In a world chasing noise, they chose to build echoes. And so, two men, one who spoke softly and one who finally listened, changed each other forever. Not through power, not through pride, but through the most human thing of all, presence. What did this story teach you about the power of listening and vulnerability? And where are you watching from today? Drop your thoughts and location in the comments below. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that remind us what it means to be human.